Beverly Copeland. This is the Beverly Copeland Report. Today is Wednesday, January 30th, 2013, Part 2. Now I'm continuing my discussion, the theme being the Second American Revolution. I said last time, and I've said in the past when I've discussed Polish-born American scholar Zbigniew Brzezinski's writings, his books, etc., that we are living through a struggle, really it is a stealth campaign to wrestle control of the Eurocentric world, which today is the world, the corporate capitalist Anglo-Saxon hegemonic world, away from the Anglo-Saxon tribe, and to give it to a new hegemonic Polish-led Yuroslav New World Order, which in my opinion would be a disaster. Keeping it real, I'm just going to say it, I push the envelope. I could not live in a world with anyone but Anglo-Saxons in charge. I say that as an African American. I say, think about it. Now that sounds shocking, but think about it. Look at the situation in Africa for African Americans. Look at the situation in Asia for African Americans. Look at the situation in Eastern Europe for African Americans. Look at the situation in black people in Latin America for black people. And look at the situation around the world for other people of color. I think most people of color would agree that we are, the Anglo-Saxons, using Churchill's language, the Anglo-Saxons are the worst, except when compared to all the others. And I think most people would feel that way. Whether you're a person of color or white, a Jew, a Gentile, whoever you are. Because it's the truth. Just look at the world. Now, moving right on, think about that. I like to push the envelope, make people think. So that is why I say I'm a proud, unabashed supporter of Anglo-Saxon Western capitalism. I would not want to live in a world, for example, with Jewish people in charge. I would not want to live in a world with black people in charge, etc., etc. I wouldn't. I mean, it sounds nice, black power. I was all into that. But, keeping it real. I see what's going on in the black communities. I see what's going on in Africa. I see what's going on around the world. I see what's going on in the Caribbean. Let me be frank. I hate to say it, but it's true. In Africa, Africans were better off when they had when you adjust for technology and development. Black people in Africa were better off. I hate to say it, but it's true. When they under colonialism than they are now under neo-colonialism. Black faces in high places. In the African American communities in New York, we were better off when we had whites representing us, right, than we are now. There was more access and opportunity for blacks. You didn't have the nepotism, the cronyism. You didn't have the corruption. You had it, but not to the same magnitude. I try to keep it real. Now, again, we are living through a second American Revolution. The first one really wasn't a revolution, the colonists. That was really power sharing among aristocrats, in my humble opinion. A call for power sharing among aristocrats. Today it really is a revolution because it's a radical fundamental change that threatens to shift control of the Eurocentric world away from away from Anglo-Saxon, Western Europeans, for the first time, away from Western Europeans to Euroslavs, for the first time in the history of the Eurocentric world, which is today the world. Now, And how has that happened? It has happened, in my opinion, because the highest levels of the American political intellectual class have used fear to convince the powers that be, the capitalists, the blue bloods, and the church, that they should concede their power to them and allow them to destroy the old world order in order to save the old world order. I refer to the quote from Brzezinski's book, the Steppenwolf quote, his Between Two Ages: human life is reduced to real suffering, to hell only when two ages, two cultures, and religions overlap. Now, and hasn't the world been turned into pure hell? We face economic collapse, poverty, disease, war, and But the problem is, when you destroy you can't save yourself by destroying yourself. When you destroy yourself, you allow other people to take over, and that's precisely what I see happening, right? All of this dysfunction that we see in America, for example, the drugs, the poverty, the erosion of religious-based values, we don't see that in Poland. No, Poland is ready to lead. Poland does not need immigrants in on the low end, Mexicans to do low end work. And it doesn't need Asians on the high end to do a high end work. No, not Poland. And as a result, it is ethnically pure Yugoslav and Polish. But all around the world, in the developed world, Western Europe and America, there is a need for immigration because the population, the people have been so destroyed, particularly in America. It's been so destroyed that the business interests are demanding immigrants. On the low end, the Mexicans, Mexicans; on the high end, the Asians, the professionals, to do the work because Americans are not competitive. But if the Poles are competitive, they don't need it. Go figure. So, I just wanted to say that, again, the way it has been done is the elites in the American political intellectual class, in my opinion, and I'm entitled to my opinion, the government and these scholars at these fancy schools have come up with policies, these fancy schools, policies that are made laws by the Congress and carried out by the President of the United States. Whether it's war on terror, benign neglect, Arab Spring, and these have crippled and undermined and destroyed the old world order. And they have, and they continue to. So we see, for example, now the Arab Spring, to turn that region of the world into chaos like that, to me, is sick. It's like you have to be sick, and there is no benefit to America, to American capitalism, to Anglo-Saxon Western capitalism, because the war is a neocon war. Here's an example of what I mean about the political intellectual class developing policies that bring down and destroy the old world order. The neocon, I can't think of a better example than the neocon paradigm. Now you see the defense secretaries, the head of the CIAs, people like Brzezinski too on TV. Well, we have a new situation, so you can't use the old military paradigm to fight the war. You have to come up with a new paradigm. Implicit in what they're saying is the old military-industrial complex, as bad as it was, let me backtrack. At least the military-industrial complex provided jobs for American workers, whether they were working in the automobile companies making Jeeps, tanks, or working for Boeing making aircraft. Even if it wasn't like Ronald Reagan's defense policy, military spending without a war, you had Jeeps, tanks, boats, planes, guns and stuff. This created jobs and wealth and income for the huge defense multinationals, the military-industrial complex. It modernized our military, kept it prepared, right? Okay? But now what we have, ladies and gentlemen, the powers that be have been hoodwinked into believing that they have to adopt the neocon paradigm. The neocon paradigm by design outsources the defense budget overseas. It bypasses the American economy. It doesn't provide jobs for American workers. It doesn't provide contracts for major defense firms. It doesn't provide income or wealth for the shareholders at the major defense multinationals. Now, war economies are always not that great, even when it's like Reagan, a war economy without a war, just modernizing the military-industrial complex. But at least they were producing jobs and income and wealth in the economy. And under Reagan, without a war. With the neocon paradigm, it's outsourcing the money. It is bypassing the American workers, the American shareholders at the defense multinational. They're not making money. That's part of the reason the economy is going to hell in a handbasket. It's outsourcing it to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Tunisia, now Mali. And I saw an idiot a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to even name the name. An idiot talking about a neocon war from the Atlantic, west coast of Africa, all the way to the Pacific, Asia. And I said, this is an idiot. I said, I had to say he's an idiot because if he knows what he's saying, he's a treason. He's a traitor. It's treason. If he knows what he's saying, then it's treason. I have to say he's an idiot to say this. Because by design, a neocon war is a war, like you see, it's like a policing action. It's like an insurgency, rebellion. You sell little guns and stuff, right? And so first you go in, you bomb an area, right? Like they bomb Mali now. The French bomb, like they bomb Libya, they bomb Syria. You bomb, right? The big boys bomb, and then they flood it with these little guys, or really the little guys on the ground. They use clients. They sell them these guns, and these politicians get kickbacks and bribes, and 185,000 people, their little cronies, get contracts, and they give the politician kickbacks and bribes. And it bypasses the major defense multinationals, their workers, their shareholders. It goes to 185,000 little people, retired CIA, retired police, retired military, people like that. So I often wonder, is the reason the cops are not doing anything, did nothing to help my mother, nothing to help me, because they're tied to these little neocon contracts. Like these politicians go to like Giuliani Partners or this one or that one. They get these little neocon contracts, so it's a gravy train. And here I am defending my country and the proud and the best support of Anglo-Saxon Western capital. They don't want to hear it. These little people, the political intellectual elites, retired scholars, government officials, retired military, CIA, politicians, cops and top cops and whatnot, they don't want to hear that. They got a gravy train going. One big problem again, it bypasses the American economy, the workers, the shareholders, the managers, and no profit for the large defense multinationals. It's just 185 little people getting a contract to tell people who know how to police their country, how to police it. And by the way, what it's also doing, it's providing seed money for a Yugoslav defense industry. No doubt, no doubt. So it's doing it's shifting resources away from outsourcing resources from the American economy. Hello, we face a depression. And what it's doing is providing the seed money for Yugoslav industry. You see increasingly the guns and stuff of tanks are being made in Europe. Hungary, Ukraine. Well, they will need a military-industrial complex once they seize control of the Eurocentric world. So this is helping them finance that, the war on terror. But let me say this too, because it has to be said. In my opinion, and I can give you why I say this. Now, the same character, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. And Robert Gates, who happened to be Zbigniew Brzezinski's personal assistant, has served now about 7 presidents, most notably as the director of CIA and or the defense secretary. He was Obama's first secretary of defense. He was W's, I think, CIA director or secretary of defense. Who gave Robert Gates his big break? This same Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Robert Gates, after the Carter, and I believe, this is what he said. Now, the Carter, in his book, and this is a must-read, it's called From the Shadows by Robert Gates. And he says, and Jimmy Carter is and always has been an honorable man. And this is, I think, proof of it. He said, the Carter administration, from the top, President Carter, down, except for Brzezinski. I'm going to repeat that. The Carter administration, from the top down, except for Brzezinski, arrived in Washington suspicious and distrustful of the CIA. So, later in this book, Gates discusses the fact that Carter trusted Brzezinski to handle the rescue operation for the hostages, right? Remember the hostage crisis, which really was Carter's undoing. It was a terrible fiasco, and I agree that is what led to Ray Carter's defeat. He wasn't reelected because of the fiasco of the hostage rescue. It was a botched job. It was like a Keystone Cops. It was awful. It was terrible. It was tragic. And who was responsible for that? According to Gates in his book, the same Zbigniew Brzezinski, right? I'm going to read what he says in his book on page 136. The Carter administration, from top down, except for Brzezinski, arrived in Washington suspicious and distrustful of the CIA. I'm going to also read in this book what I have to, as a proud, unabashed supporter of Anglo-Saxon Western capitalism, as a loyalist to Britannia, and as an American patriot, I have to read this. Because, in my opinion, these Islamic insurgents, whether the ones in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Syria, now these Islamic rebels in Mali, they are, in my opinion, all controlled by the CIA. I'm going to tell you why. This is Robert Gates' book, From the Shadows. And this is when he talks about the creation of, just listen. In February 1980, Brzezinski traveled to Pakistan, where alone with President Mohammad Zia, they discussed an expanded covert action program. From Pakistan, Brzezinski went on to Saudi Arabia, where he cemented the arrangement that the Saudis would match the U.S. commitment to the Mujahideen. Now, this was done ostensibly, the argument was, to provide a thorn in the side of Russia, then it was the Soviet Union, in the Soviet-Afghan war during the remnants of the Cold War. This was why this was argued that Brzezinski went to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia to secure financing for the Mujahideen. One big problem with that. The Mujahideen is that group that has morphed into all of these splinters, so-called terrorists, Islamic terrorists, or insurgents, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, all around the world. So I have now another quote, which also adds to my belief, and I'm entitled to my opinion, that this has all been, they are still to this very day controlled by the CIA and used as a pretext to launch these neocon wars, which are cannibalizing the global economy and destroying the old world Anglo-Saxon corporate capitalist hegemony. Who's benefiting from these neocon wars? Little people, retired CIA, retired top cops, retired politicians, retired government officials who go to places like Iraq, 185,000 of them, and the Yugoslav, increasingly defense industry, that are making these little guns and stuff at the expense of the rest of the world, and it's turning our friends and allies' lives into, like the quote from Steppenwolf, into human life is reduced to real suffering, to hell. That's what it's doing. It's unconscionable. How can a woman Secretary of State? Well, anyway, let me just, here we go. And this is what he talks about, this mujahideen. But, you know, he said Brzezinski went to Pakistan and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis really don't want, Zia was killed, by the way. He died not too long after that in an airplane crash. And in my opinion, the Saudis do not want to support this. They have to be extremely nervous, because if Assad falls, then Kuwait, then Saudi Arabia. They are arm twisting the Saudis. It's clearly and unequivocally not in their interest to support this, but they have the big bucks, the petrodollars. But let me read this. Oh my God. Okay, in terms of the Mujahideen, and the Mujahideen has morphed into Al Qaeda, Hamas, all of that. Let me read this. The key alliances were established with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and the first elements of an extraordinary logistics pipeline from suppliers around the world were assembled. The stage was set for the vast future expansion of outside help, all run by the CIA. So I'm entitled to my opinion. I think that clearly and unequivocally, to my way of thinking, given how things have unfolded, has created this monster, quote unquote, these Islamic rebels, or insurgents, we call them terrorists. Right, that's my take on it. And they are constantly being fueled by policies, in my opinion, of the American political intellectual class through paradigms like the neocon paradigm, and money is arm twisting wealthy oil producing states and others to finance the purchase of weapons, not from the American military industrial complex, but from these, weapons and contracts, etc., for these 185,000 little people. I believe the situation in Mali never had to happen. I believe that those Islamists, so-called insurgents that penetrated Mali or were instruments of the CIA. I believe that if they want to have a war from the Atlantic to the Pacific, as I heard one of these idiots say, a neocon suggests a neocon war. The only way that could be done is through instigation, and I'm entitled to my opinion, from the CIA, which in my opinion is treason, which in my opinion means that since it's clearly not in the interest of the capitalists, the major defense multinationals, the American workers, Main Street, or the shareholders, it's in the interest of, in fact, it shifts resources from them and it destroys them. It, in my opinion, destroying a country's military is treason. Who benefits? The 185,000 retired CIA cops, government officials, military. Who benefits? These increasingly these Yugoslav defense companies that are creating this Yugoslav military industrial complex at the expense of ours, because Ford's not making tanks and Jeeps, Boeing's not making planes, none of that. War is always a bad way to stimulate economic growth. Not to mention that, unlike when people say, well, World War II got us out of the Depression. It did, but that was a completely different economy. Completely. At that time, there was pent-up demand, and the government had the capacity to increase the debt. Now the debt is so large, we can't afford a war. We can't afford, the debt is so large. We could then, the government could borrow, we could have debt. We can't have it now because the government debt is too large. It's just all of this is a planned and systematic process to destroy, in my opinion, the old world Anglo-Saxon corporate capitalist hegemony. And as a proud, unabashed supporter of Anglo-Saxon Western capitalism, I cannot support it. I can't support it. And as a loyalist, I can't support it. It's not going to work. It's going to continue to destroy Western capitalism, destroy the economy. It's going to accelerate this depression, make the depression more severe. Who benefits? Let's say if someone wants to run for president, they get kickbacks from these arms merchants, from these neocon contracts. They benefit. The 185,000 people, little guys who get the contracts, the politicians who get kickback them for the contract, the Yugoslav defense merchants, they benefit. No one else benefits from this chaos. No one. It is, in my opinion, treason, and it's time the American people, the world is waiting for the American people to rise up and shut this whole apparatus down that has hijacked our government and is destroying this country and the rest of the world. I'm Beverly Copeland. This has been the Beverly Copeland Report.